So we noticed that you guys really like it whenever we cover Joe Rogan here on the show. So I guess we'll start doing it.
We're going to bring you more Joe Rogan content.
Anytime Joe says something interesting in political, we thought we'll talk about it. So he had an interesting segment on his show that came out yesterday. And it was talking about, I'm sure we both saw this, which is about this person who ingested fish tank cleaner and died because they said that it was a terrible death. And people were saying, the media in particular said, person ingests medicine touted by Trump and so dies. And so it became this whole thing where like, no, actually it's just a certain type of fish tank cleaner which shares a similar name and it's not the same type of same type of treatment, that treatment is actually showing some promise in France and other places that people are using it. It's also a pandemic, limited clinical trials. Dr. Fauci and others have talked about it. Okay, so it became a media segment. But Joe, I actually thought, covered it really well, where he says that Trump is getting in the way of accuracy for people's reporting of the news. And this is a perfect example of this by resorting to clickbait, saying that they heard it from Trump, but that's not what he said. He's talking about a different type of chloroquine. There's more than one type of chloroquine. And what he really talks about here is about how the media beclowns itself whenever it talks, but whenever it tries to say, blame Trump for a death of fish tank cleaner, when it could have just said, hey, don't ingest fish tank cleaner. There are two different types of chloroquine. They're not all the same. Also, don't ingest it yourself. Go to a doctor. If they give it to you, then you're good.
Right. And part of the point is something that we've seen over the course of his presidency is, if you're a reporter, if you're a journalist, your emotion around something can really get in the way of seeing things clearly, of reporting things clearly. And I think that's happened for a lot of people in the Trump era. We see it with Bernie Sanders coverage too, because there's all this emotion around this individual, which, look, Lord knows I understand. But it means that they make every single story about him. So even something like this, it just makes it seem like they're looking for an angle to try to blame him for anything. And you could say that it wasn't responsible for the president to float this drug before it was really tested and ready for prime time. I think you could debate that. I'm not really sure. But he didn't tell anyone to go out and ingest fish cleaner. And so what happens is, because they hit him on things that are not really fair, then when there is a really fair critique, which there are lots of really fair critiques throughout his administration, especially right now.
Which you and I have made.
Absolutely. They don't land with any sort of resonance or credibility because you've been so unfair and so many other things. There's also a ratings and a business angle. Every single story, not everything that happens in the world or even happens in this country is about Donald Trump. But they make every story about Trump good or Trump bad, right? If you're on a certain network, it's all Trump good. And every story is about, the president's incredible leadership. But if you're on another network, it's everything is about Trump's failures and how terrible he is. And so, it becomes obvious that their bias becomes obvious. And people don't ultimately trust the information that's coming out and trust you to be a neutral arbiter of whether or not the president is, in fact, doing a good job. So that's what you see during this time, even as, rightfully the president has been criticized by the mainstream press. People are coming to their own decisions and are actually giving him relatively high marks because they're not taking the press's word about how he's actually performing.
And I thought Joe said it well here. It says, just because you hate Trump, you can't distort this and make it seem like Trump did something irresponsible by talking about a hopeful disease medication. And these people took the wrong version of it and died. That's a cautionary tale not to crap on Trump. I'm doing a little bit of a censoring there, but everything's not a chance to crap on Trump. It's so exhausting and it's just so effing weird, man. And I couldn't agree with him more, which is that part of the reason I even left White House press corps and all of this is because this is what it was always like. It was always why is this the president's fault? And I noticed, you would see these anchors from the three major networks or these correspondents from three major networks, and they would all ask the same version of the same question, which was some version of why are you a liar? Why are you a terrible? What all this? And they were each doing it so they could get their own soundbite on their own network that they could play and turn it into a confrontation and say the president is a uniquely uncouth and terrible person. And that none of it was ever about actually getting getting to the bottom of even the substance of the issues that they were talking about. And it's maddening.
Right.
It's maddening to everybody.
Right. And again, you see the same thing with Bernie Sanders, right? You see the same just sort of animus, and everything has to be turned around to why he's bad, why he's problematic, why his movement is bad and problematic and toxic.
Will you apologize? Will you apologize? Remember Tulsi, will you run third party? It's like they ask the same thing over and over and over again.
After a relentless drumbeat for years, ever since the president was elected, relentless drumbeat, some of it justified, some of it not, of criticism against him, they wonder how he's in position to potentially get reelected, why he's in a stronger position now than he was against Hillary Clinton, and it always gets blamed on like the voters. Well, they're too stupid to understand how bad he's been. They're too stupid. They're too racist. They're too sexist, etc. When in reality, there were criticisms there that may have landed, but because you always go against him on every single thing and always try to find any way to go against him, it means that when you do have a legitimate critique, of which there are many, it doesn't land with anyone.
No, it certainly doesn't. Actually, a new poll came out showing, like, what do you think about each institution's handling of the crisis? Who's the lowest? The media! Lower than Trump. So there you go, guys.
They need to be watching Rising.
Congrats.
That's all.
Yeah, they need to. That's right. If more people watch Rising, those trust numbers will go up. So do your part and spread the word. All right.
All right. We'll have more Rising for you after this.